They told Avery the job came with one rule: don't ask questions. They told her the pay was generous enough to make a person forget their conscience. What they didn't tell her was that the man she'd be caring for had already sent 2 paramedics home in tears, one with a broken wrist and one who simply never spoke about it afterward. What they didn't tell her was that Stellan Voss— no, she corrected herself. She needed a different name, someone she hadn't heard of before. They told her the assignment was discreet. They didn't tell her it would change everything. Avery Sinclair was 29 years old, a registered nurse with 6 years of ICU experience at Toronto General. Standing in the rain outside a Shoppers Drug Mart on King Street West with $73 in her checking account and a voicemail she hadn't yet found the courage to play. The notification light on her phone blinked red. She already knew what it would say. The same thing it always said. Her brother's group home was raising its monthly rate again, effective the 1st of November. And if she couldn't cover the shortfall, they'd have to find alternative placement. Alternative placement. The phrase made her stomach clench. Her brother Danny— no, not Danny. She needed names, clean names, names that hadn't been spoken in any of the stories that came before. Her brother Theo— no, Theo was taken too. Her brother Reed. Reed Sinclair was 24 years old with a traumatic brain injury sustained at 18, in a car accident that wasn't his fault and a laugh that still sounded like a kid on Christmas morning. He needed consistent care, consistent routine, and a room at Lakeshore Residential that cost $4,200 a month. Avery's salary covered it exactly, down to the last dollar, until the building had new owners, and new owners had new ideas about pricing. She needed $800 more a month, starting in 6 weeks. The phone buzzed in her hand. Not a voicemail this time. A text from a number she didn't recognize, area code she couldn't place. Miss Sinclair, you were referred by a colleague. I understand you require a private nursing engagement. If you are available, a car will collect you from the corner of King and Spadina in 15 minutes. The compensation is $8,000 per week, cash. The position is temporary. Discretion is non-negotiable. Avery read it twice. $8,000 a week. She should have laughed. She should have called the number back and asked who was paying for something like that and why. She should have walked to her car, driven home to her apartment in Parkdale, made tea, and minded her own business. She stood at the corner of King and Spadina 14 minutes later. The car that pulled up was a black Cadillac Escalade with Quebec plates, which struck her as strange. The man in the driver's seat didn't introduce himself. The woman in the passenger seat turned around, handed Avery a non-disclosure agreement printed on heavy cream stock, and said, "Sign before we leave the city. We won't be stopping." Avery signed. They drove west, then north, through Mississauga and then beyond it, out through Halton Hills where the subdivisions gave way to horse farms and silence. 2 hours of silence, more or less, the kind that felt pressurized. The kind that tells you that whoever is waiting at the other end is not the sort of person who tolerates small talk. The property was set back from a county road behind a gate that would have looked at home on a government facility. Iron, tall, camera-mounted. The fence ran as far as she could see in both directions through the dark. Inside the gate, a gravel drive curved through a stand of old maples to a house that was large in the way that didn't bother announcing itself. Stone and timber, 3 stories, every window lit from within but the curtains drawn. It looked less like a home than a declaration. Inside, she was taken to a study where a man named Gregor Holt was waiting. Holt was 50-ish, lean and precise, with the manner of someone who had spent decades being the second most important person in any room and had made peace with it. "Mr. Caruso is recovering from a gunshot wound sustained 8 days ago," Holt said without greeting her. "The wound is to the upper left abdomen, below the last rib. Exit wound present. He was treated off the record at a private facility. He was discharged, against medical advice, 3 days ago." Who discharged him? He did. Avery looked at the contract. Holt slid across the desk. There were also 3 clauses in the addendum that amounted to the same message. Speak about this to anyone, and the consequences would be civil, financial, and otherwise. She had been in enough difficult situations to know that otherwise was the operative word. What are the care requirements? Wound assessment, dressing changes, antibiotic administration, monitoring for signs of sepsis or internal bleed. He won't go to hospital. That is not a negotiation. Your job is to keep him stable enough that he doesn't have to. And Holt's expression didn't change. Then you will be creative. What happened to the last nurse? She lasted 4 days. Holt paused. She wasn't let go. She requested reassignment. "Mr. Caruso can be resistant how? You'll see." Holt stood, indicating the conversation was over. "His rooms are on the 2nd floor, east wing. He's expecting you. He's also expecting you to fail. I'd advise proving him wrong. The hallway upstairs was carpeted and quiet, lit by low sconces that cast the kind of warm light that had no business being in a house this cold in atmosphere. Avery, brought from home. Because she never trusted equipment she hadn't checked herself. She knocked on the door at the end of the hall. No answer. She knocked again. "It's open," said a voice from inside. Low, rough-edged. The voice of someone managing pain and choosing not to show it. She pushed the door open. The room was large and spare, the curtains pulled tight over what she assumed were tall windows. A fire had burned down to embers in the grate. The furniture was dark and minimal and expensive, the kind of expensive that didn't need to try. And in a chair beside the dead fire, sitting with his legs apart and his head tipped back and one arm resting across his midsection, like he was trying to hold himself together from the outside, was the man she was here for. Dominic Caruso was not what she had expected. She hadn't known what to expect, exactly. The name meant nothing to her, deliberately so, she suspected, in the same way that powerful men often meant nothing to people who were not meant to know them. He was tall, even-seated. Dark hair, jaw unshaved for the better part of a week. He had the kind of face that would have been called handsome in a magazine, and was something more complicated up close. His eyes, when he opened them and looked at her, were the color of dark water, grey-green, sharp, and substantially more aware than a man with an infected abdominal wound had any right to be. "You're the nurse," he said. It wasn't a question. Avery Sinclair, yes. She set her kit down on the table and began pulling on gloves. "When did you last change the dressing?" "This morning. Who changed it?" "I did." She looked at him. "You changed your own abdominal dressing. The alternative was waiting for you." Avery took a breath through her nose. "I'm going to need you to lift your shirt." He didn't move. He watched her instead, the way a person watches something they've decided they're not sure about yet. Holt said you were the best he could find on short notice. Holt was being kind. "I'm the best he could find, full stop. Shirt, please." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but the absence of the cold that had been there before. He lifted the hem of his shirt. The dressing was wrong. She could see that immediately. Whoever had taped it, and she suspected him, from the uneven placement, had applied too much pressure on the lateral edge and not enough on the medial, which meant the wound underneath had been weeping in the wrong direction. She peeled the tape back carefully. He didn't flinch, which told her he was either genuinely high pain tolerance or had been flinching in private long enough that he'd learned to stop in front of people. The wound itself was worse than Holt had implied. The exit was clean, relatively speaking, but the entry site showed the beginning of cellulitis spreading at the margin. Not full sepsis, not yet, but the direction it was heading without intervention. "This is infected," she said. "I know. Have you been taking the antibiotics they discharged you with?" "Some of them." "Some? They made me slow." He said it the way someone states a fact, not an excuse. "I can't be slow right now. Mr. Caruso, you can't be dead right now either. And those are currently your two options if you don't finish the course." She began cleaning the wound with saline, her movements deliberate and careful. He was watching her hands. "I'm going to need to redress this properly, start you back on the full antibiotic protocol, and check your temperature every 4 hours. There's a port line here." She pressed lightly near the entry. "When did you last flush it?" "Yesterday." "Was there resistance?" A beat of silence. "Some. Okay." She kept her voice neutral. Panic was not useful. "We're going to need to address that tonight. I'm going to be honest with you, because I think that's more useful to both of us than not. You are in the early stages of a wound infection that will become systemic if we don't intervene aggressively. That means full antibiotic compliance. It means you rest. It means you let me do my job." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not afraid," he said. "I'm a little afraid," she said honestly, applying the new dressing with precise, even pressure. "But I'm more afraid of watching someone get septic when I could have prevented it. So, he repeated. Something in his tone had changed, not softened, but recalibrated. "Fine. Do what you need to do." She did. It took 40 minutes. He sat still for most of it, which she suspected cost him more than he showed. When she was finished, she checked his temperature, 38.3. High, but not critically, she made a note. "I'll be back in 4 hours, she said, stripping her gloves. "You don't need to." 4 hours, Mr. Caruso." She picked up her kit and walked to the door. "Sinclair." She turned. He was looking at the window, not at her. "There's a kitchen downstairs." Holt stocked it. "You should eat something." It was the most reluctant form of consideration she had ever encountered, and it was oddly, profoundly sincere. "Thank you," she said. She ate toast, standing at the kitchen counter at 11:30 at night, listening to the house settle around her, and tried not to think about how far from home she was or how many people knew where she had gone. The answer, she calculated, was 2. the shady colleague who had passed on her number, and Reed, whom she had texted before the car had left the city. Working a private case. Couple weeks, I'll call when I can. Love you. He had texted back a string of hockey emojis and a single thumb up. She had not slept well in years, but that night she did not sleep at all. By the third day, something between them had shifted in the way that difficult things shift when two people are forced into close proximity with each other's worst moments. She had seen him sweat through a fever at 2 a.m. and hold himself together through sheer stubbornness. He had seen her spend 45 minutes coaxing a collapsed vein back to usefulness without losing her composure. The dynamic had not become warm. It had become instead something more solid, functional, and occasionally something closer to honest. "You fired from somewhere?" he asked on the 4th morning, while she was checking his blood pressure. Direct, no preamble. Avery's hand stilled for just a moment on the cuff. "What? Holtz, research. You were at Toronto General for 5 years. Then you weren't. Then you were at a clinic in Hamilton for 8 months. Then private cases." He looked at her with those flat, observant eyes. "That's not a career progression, that's a detour." "I disagreed with a physician about a treatment protocol," Avery said. Publicly. In front of the family. "Were you right?" "Yes. And you were let go anyway." The physician was on the board of directors. Mr. Caruso made a sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh, abbreviated before it could arrive. What was the protocol? He wanted to pull palliative support from a patient who had documented wishes to the contrary. The family didn't know they could push back. I told them they could. She finished with the cuff, noted the reading, better than yesterday. He went home. The patient had another 11 months. Not comfortable ones, but her own. He was quiet for a moment. "Holt also told me about your brother," he said. She'd expected that. She had steeled herself for it in the same way she'd steeled herself for the fence and the silence and the documents signed before leaving the city. Information was currency, and men like Dominic Caruso did not invite strangers into their houses without collecting it first. "Then you know why I'm here," she said evenly. "He's in a residential facility in Toronto, yes, and the cost has gone up. It does every year." She packed the blood pressure cuff back into her kit. "Is this a warning? That you know? Or are you just letting me know that you know?" He studied her. "Neither," he said. "I'm telling you that I understand why a person makes choices they otherwise wouldn't." He paused. "The O'Brien family runs that part of the city, the residential care operators. They tend to jack up rates to push out families they'd prefer to replace with higher-fee clients." She looked at him steadily. And I know Liam O'Brien, Mr. Caruso." "I'm not offering anything," he said flatly. "I'm telling you facts. What you do with facts is your business." He reached for the glass of water on the nightstand, a gesture that, 2 days ago, he'd been too proud to make in front of her. "Now, is my fever down? 37.6. Good." He picked up the glass. "Bring me something other than broth for lunch. Your digestion. Sinclair." He looked at her with an expression that was, she would later think, the closest thing she'd seen to humor on his face. "I run a shipping operation with 43 employees across 4 provinces. I have survived 2 previous attempts on my life, a hostile acquisition of my father's company, and a February in Winnipeg. I can manage a bowl of soup." She brought him soup, and, separately, a ham sandwich which she left on the tray without comment. It was gone when she returned at noon. She was in the kitchen at 2 a.m. 5 days later when she heard the voices. She hadn't been able to sleep. That had become ordinary. She'd been lying in the small bedroom off the east wing reading a novel on her phone, listening to the old house talk to itself, when the low ceiling of her anxiety, which she had developed an impressive ability to keep low, rose suddenly, and she thought, "Get up, make tea." She was waiting for the kettle when she heard them through the vent above the stove. The vent, she had noticed on her first day, ran along the ceiling between the kitchen and the room Holt used as an office. She had assumed it an inconvenience. She revised that assumption now. "It has to be this week," said a voice she didn't recognize, not Holt. Someone else. "He's still not at full capacity. The window closes when he's back on his feet." "You told them about the nurse?" said a second voice. "She's nothing. A complication. They'll go through her." The kettle began to whistle. Avery yanked the cord from the wall. "Callahan wants the port access codes and the deed to the Brampton property. That was the arrangement. We deliver both and we walk." "We." She pressed herself against the cold tile of the counter. There was someone inside this house. And the woman? A pause that told her everything she needed to know. She signed an NDA. That's not the same as silence. She did not wait for the rest. She moved out of the kitchen as quietly as she could manage in bare feet. On hardwood, the hallway was dark. She did not turn on the light. She went up the stairs, holding the banister, counting the steps from memory she'd been counting since the first night, Out of habit, the kind of nursing habit that meant knowing how to move in an emergency without a visual reference. She knocked on his door, quietly first, then harder. "Mr. Caruso." She pressed her mouth close to the crack in the door. "Mr. Caruso, I need you to hear me. There are people downstairs, at least 2 of them. One is inside the house, and I don't think he's supposed to be stewardessy." A pause. Then from inside, "Come in." She pushed the door open. He was already up, which surprised her. He was standing beside the bed in dark clothes, his color not good, but his bearing completely different from any version of him she'd seen in 5 days of care. He was holding a phone, and his eyes were doing the rapid assessing thing that she'd noticed he did when information arrived. "Who?" he said quietly. "I don't know the first voice. The second one was Holt." Something went across his face then. Not surprise, exactly. More like the particular expression of a person who had hoped they were wrong and has now had that hope cancelled. "You're certain?" "I've heard him speak for 5 days. Yes." Mr. Caruso looked at her for a long, still moment. Then he moved to the desk, opened the bottom drawer, and removed a phone she had not seen before. He dialed a single number without looking at the screen. "Renaud. Code 7. Eastern entrance. Now." He hung up. "Who's Renaud? Someone who isn't Holt." He crossed to the window and stood at the edge of the curtain, looking out at the dark grounds. "How many voices did you hear?" "2. In the office. There could be more." "There are." He said it quietly as a statement. "They've been watching the property since Tuesday. I've been waiting to see who on the inside would move first." He turned from the window. His jaw was set, but she could see the cost of standing like this, the slight compression in his breathing that meant his side was pulling. "The man in the office with Holt is called Callahan. He wants 2 things. He's not going to get them. Mr. Caruso, stay here," he said. "Lock the door when I leave." "You can't," she started. He looked at her, and the look was enough, not threatening, just absolute. "Don't. I'm not your patient right now, Sinclair." "You're bleeding again," she said. Because it was true. The left side of his shirt had a dark spot forming at the hip where the dressing had been strained by standing too long. "You've been upright for 10 minutes, and you're already losing integrity on the wound margin. You cannot engage in a physical altercation and survive it without significant damage. That's not a nursing opinion. That's basic anatomy." He stared at her. "So tell me," she said, "what can actually be done with a phone from this room?" A beat of silence. 2. "More than you'd think," he said, slowly. "Then let's do that." She crossed the room and sat in the chair beside his desk, the one she'd sat in every morning for 5 days while she did his dressing change. "Sit down. Call who you need to call. I'll monitor your vitals while you do it." He sat, not because she had asked. She understood that. He sat because it was tactically sensible, and she had happened to say so first. He spent the next 30 minutes on the phone. Quiet, clipped sentences in a combination of English and something she thought might be Italian, and once, briefly, French. She took his blood pressure twice. She listened to the sounds of the house shift, footsteps below that weren't Holt's measured tread, a door opening hard, a sound that she would later describe to herself, simply, as resolution. She did not ask questions. She kept her hands steady on the cuff and her eyes on the clock. When it was over, Renaud, a compact, expressionless man in his 40s, who looked as though he had been built specifically for situations exactly like this one, came upstairs and spoke to Mr. Caruso briefly at the door. After he left, Mr. Caruso sat back in the chair and closed his eyes. "Holt?" she asked. "Handled." He didn't elaborate. She rechecked the wound. The bleeding had stopped, but the strain was visible. She applied a secondary dressing without speaking. He let her. "Callahan's people knew about you," he said while she worked. "They knew your name, your brother's facility, the shortfall." His voice was carefully level. "It was in the information they planned to use as leverage. She absorbed this, to use against you, to make you cooperative." He opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling. "They planned to offer to cover your brother's costs if you gave them access to the property system. The gate codes, the camera feeds." She sat back on her heels. "They were going to approach me. Tonight, probably." He looked at her. "You would have been the inside contact they couldn't find in the house. Holt was supposed to set it up." She thought about the voicemail she hadn't played, the unknown number from 3 days ago that she'd assumed was a client from an old agency. She thought about what she would have said if someone had called her with Reed's residential costs already solved, simply solved, in exchange for a small piece of information she wasn't even entirely sure she understood. She thought about what she would have done. She did not like the answer. "I wouldn't have," she said, but her voice came out less certain than she intended. Mr. Caruso looked at her steadily. "No," he said. "I don't think you would have, but it would have cost you." He paused. "That's the point of leverage like that. It's not that you betray the person. It's that you don't sleep for a week deciding, is that what happened to the last nurse?" A silence. "No. The last nurse genuinely just found me intolerable. The corner of his mouth moved, barely. She was correct. Avery sat with that for a moment, then stood, peeling off her gloves. Your temperature has been stable for 36 hours. The cellulitis margin is retreating. If you maintain the antibiotic schedule for the next 4 days and don't do anything like what you almost did tonight, you will not need hospital care. She picked up her kit. I'll check on you at 6. He was looking at his hands. It was the first time since she'd arrived that he'd looked anywhere other than at her, or at whatever he was working on when speaking to her. Raid's residential facility. The O'Brien rate increase. Mr. Caruso, not a debt, he said quietly. You were brought into this without full information. Someone in my employ used what they knew about your situation as a weapon, and not on my behalf. He looked up. His eyes were darker in the lamplight, and tired, and very serious. She stood at the door for a moment. I know, she said finally. I've had 5 days to form an opinion. She left without looking back. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall for a moment in the dark and breathed, slowly the way she'd learned in ICU when the room was loud and someone needed her to be the steadiest thing in it. 2 days later, she was in the kitchen making actual breakfast, eggs, toast, the good coffee, from the second shelf, when Renaud came in and set a plain envelope on the counter beside the stove. From Mr. Caruso, he said, and left. Inside the envelope was a single card. On it, in handwriting that was decisive and oddly careful. Lakeshore Residential. The O'Brien increase has been reversed. It will not recur. DC below it in smaller print. Stay for the full 2 weeks. I haven't finished arguing about breakfast. She stood there in the kitchen of a stone house 2 hours north of Toronto, holding a card from a man she'd met 6 days ago under circumstances that made no ordinary sense, and felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight for so long she'd forgotten what the absence of it felt like. When she brought him his breakfast, eggs, coffee, and toast, which was both a medical accommodation and at this point a treaty, he looked at the tray and then at her, and he didn't say anything about it. He moved over slightly on the bed so she could sit in the chair without having to push it from the far wall. She sat. He ate. Outside, the November trees had lost the last of their leaves, and the sky had gone the hard, flat grey of a Canadian winter arriving ahead of schedule, and the house was quiet, and it was, Avery Sinclair thought, a very strange thing to feel safe. A week after the night of the phones and the voices in the wall, on the morning she was due to leave. Her kit packed, her coat by the door, the car coming at 9. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was dressed properly for the first time since her arrival. Dark trousers, a grey sweater, no IV line. He moved carefully but without the compressed, managed quality she'd watched him fight for days. He was, medically speaking, stable. She had written her discharge notes at midnight. Wound integrity restored, cellulitis resolved, no systemic signs of infection, full antibiotic course completed. Prognosis good, conditional on continued rest, and no further acts of profound stubbornness, but she had not written that last part. The car's early, she said. I told them not to come. She looked at him. I need another week of monitoring. He said it in the tone of someone reading a medical document. Flat, factual. My range of motion is still compromised, and the port site needs daily assessment. Avery looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Caruso. Dominic, he said. It was the first time. He said it like it cost him something and he'd decided the cost was acceptable. My name is Dominic. She turned and looked out the kitchen window. The maple at the far end of the garden was bare and dark against the grey sky, and the ground had frost on it, and somewhere below the county road a truck was going past, carrying something she couldn't see. My brother has a physical therapy session on Thursdays, she said. I need to be able to call him. Unrestricted phone use, he said immediately, and I'll arrange transport if you want to see him in person. She turned back. 1 more week, he agreed. She unpacked her kit onto the kitchen counter in the spot she'd claimed on day 2, between the coffee maker and the good window. Outside, the frost on the ground caught the morning light and held it. Briefly, before the clouds moved back in, she thought about what Renaud had said to her quietly in the hallway the morning after, when she had asked him how long he had worked for Dominic Caruso. He had thought about the question for a moment and then said, long enough to know that the people he keeps around him are the people he trusts. He doesn't keep many people around him. She thought about the card on the counter at home, which she'd tucked into her coat pocket before she'd packed. She thought about what it meant to be in a place that was dangerous and to feel, improbably, that the danger was not aimed at her. She put the kettle on. The frost melted by 10 the way it always does, quietly, without fanfare, and then suddenly it was just gone, and the ground was dark and real underneath, and you had to look twice to remember it had ever been any other way.